When people say the word Egypt, images appear almost instantly. Pyramids, the Sphinx, golden pharaoh masks, desert sands, blazing sun, and the mighty Nile. But the real Egypt is far more than ancient tombs and mysteries buried beneath the sand. It is one of the most remarkable civilizations in human history, a culture that turned a narrow green ribbon along a great river into a world of gods, kings, temples, war, knowledge, faith, and immortality. The history of Egypt does not feel like the story of a single country. It feels more like a vast legend stretched across thousands of years, where myth and reality walk side by side. Here, rulers were seen as children of the gods. Stone was shaped into monuments meant to outlive time itself, and death was understood not as an ending, but as a passage into another life. The Egyptians did not build only for their own age, they built for eternity. That is why, thousands of years later, the world still looks at Egypt with awe. Everything began with the Nile. Without this river, Egypt as we know it could never have existed. Around it lay harsh and unforgiving deserts, yet the Nile flooded each year and left behind fertile black silt. That land produced food, sustained people, allowed settlements to grow, and gave rulers the power to organize a kingdom. While many other peoples lived at the mercy of nature, the Egyptians gradually learned to live in rhythm with it. The flooding of the Nile became the foundation of their life, their calendar, their economy, and even their religion. The river was not merely a source of water, it was the living artery of the entire civilization. The first communities on these lands appeared very early. Over time they became stronger, richer, and better organized. Gradually, two major regions formed along the Nile, Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt. They differed in symbols, traditions, and centers of power. Then came a turning point that entered history as one of the most important moments of the ancient world, the unification of Egypt. Tradition credits this achievement to King Narmer, often associated with the image of the first great ruler to unite the land. From that moment, Egypt began its path as a single kingdom. With that unification came a unique idea of kingship. The pharaoh was not merely a ruler, he was seen as a mediator between humans and gods, the guardian of cosmic order, and the embodiment of the state itself. His authority appeared absolute, but it rested on more than soldiers and officials. It rested on belief. The Egyptians believed that if the pharaoh was strong, if the temple stood, if the rituals were performed, and if order was maintained, then the world itself remained stable. This idea of sacred order ran through every level of Egyptian life. One of the most astonishing eras was the time of the Old Kingdom. It was then that Egypt showed the world what it was capable of. This was an age of powerful central rule, grand construction, and complete confidence in royal greatness. The most famous symbol of this era, of course, is the pyramids. Even now they inspire amazement, debate, and endless questions. How did people without modern machinery create such enormous structures? How were massive stone blocks moved and lifted? How did they achieve such precision? These questions still fascinate the world today. Yet behind the pyramids there was no magic and no hidden supernatural force. There was labor, planning, engineering, and discipline. A pyramid was not simply a tomb, it was a symbol of royal power, eternity, and the pharaoh's connection to the heavens. Among the earliest great monuments was the Step Pyramid of Djoser. created with the genius of the architect Imhotep. For its time, it was revolutionary. Later came the pyramids of Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure at Giza, the monuments that became one of the most recognizable images of the ancient world. The Great Pyramid of Khufu is especially overwhelming, enormous, severe, and almost unreal in its scale. It seems to challenge time itself. Empires have fallen, peoples vanished, religions changed, and languages disappeared, yet it still stands. Perhaps that was the dream of the ancient Egyptian kings, not only to rule, but to remain forever. Nearby rises the Great Sphinx, the mysterious figure with the body of a lion and a human face. It seems to guard not only the royal tombs, but the secret of the civilization itself. But Egypt was great not only because of stone, it was also a land of writing, record-keeping, science, and complex administration. The Egyptians developed hieroglyphic writing, which remained a mystery to later ages for centuries. Priests, scribes, and officials played a crucial role in the life of the state. A scribe in Egypt was not simply someone who could write. He belonged to an educated class that preserved knowledge, handled calculations, recorded laws, and gave written form to power. In a world where most people worked in fields or workshops, literacy opened the path to influence and prestige. Religion stood at the center of Egyptian life. The world was filled with gods, sacred symbols, spirits, rituals, and divine forces. Ra, the sun god, was among the most important deities. Osiris represented death and rebirth. Isis embodied motherhood, loyalty, and magical power. Horus symbolized kingship and the sky. Anubis guided the dead. Thoth was associated with wisdom and knowledge. Egyptian religion was never entirely fixed. Different eras elevated different cults. Local traditions blended with royal ideology, and pharaohs often sought to emphasize their own special bond with a particular god. The afterlife held a special place in Egyptian thought. For the Egyptians, death did not mean disappearance. On the contrary, death marked the beginning of the most important journey of all. To succeed in that journey, the body had to be preserved, the correct rituals had to be performed, the dead had to be supplied with everything necessary, and the soul had to be protected with sacred formulas. From this belief emerged the art of mummification, one of the most famous and astonishing Egyptian practices. The body was preserved because it remained essential to the individual's existence in the next world. Mummies, sarcophagi, funerary masks, and inscriptions covering tomb walls all belong to a vast system of belief about eternity. One of the most powerful images from that system is the judgment before Osiris, where the heart of the dead was weighed on a scale. If a person had lived justly, a favorable destiny awaited. If the heart was heavy with lies and wrongdoing, the soul faced destruction. This idea shows that the Egyptians cared not only about ritual, but also about moral order. After the splendor of the Old Kingdom, Egypt went through periods of difficulty. Strong central rule did not always survive. At times the land fractured, regional leaders gained power, economic life weakened, and royal authority declined. Yet what is remarkable is how often Egypt rose again. That was one of the greatest strengths of its civilization. It could not only create greatness, it could restore it. The Middle Kingdom became an era of renewal. The state was strengthened again, agriculture developed, trade expanded, literature and art flourished, and Egypt looked beyond its borders with greater confidence.
attention increasingly turned toward Nubia and other neighboring lands. Egypt was not an isolated world, despite how it is sometimes imagined. It traded, fought, negotiated, and exchanged goods and ideas with other peoples. But after revival came new trials. At one point, the Hyksos, rulers of foreign origin, gained control over part of Egypt. This was a profound shock to Egyptian pride and political order. Yet the struggle against them hardened the kingdom and prepared the ground for a new age, the New Kingdom, the period of Egypt's greatest power. The New Kingdom represents Egypt in all its glory. It was an age not only of wealth and temples, but of conquest, diplomacy, grand armies, ceremonial power, and unforgettable rulers. Egypt became one of the true superpowers of the ancient world. During this era ruled such famous figures as Hatshepsut, Thutmose III, Amenhotep III, Akhenaten, Tutankhamun, Seti I, and Ramesses II.
Hatshepsut holds a unique place in history. She was a woman who ruled as pharaoh, which already set her apart. But her significance goes beyond that. She showed that Egyptian kingship could be expressed not only through war, but also through construction, prosperity, and political vision. Under her rule, monumental buildings rose, trade expanded, and royal ideology was strengthened. Her mortuary temple remains one of the most beautiful achievements of Egyptian architecture. Thutmose III is often remembered as one of Egypt's greatest military leaders. He led numerous campaigns, expanded Egyptian influence, and turned the kingdom into an empire that neighboring powers had to respect. His victories brought not only glory but also wealth, tribute, resources, and prestige. Egyptian armies now operated far beyond the Nile Valley, and in diplomacy, Egypt spoke with other great states almost as an equal. Perhaps one of the strangest and boldest figures in Egyptian history was Akhenaten. He attempted a near-revolutionary religious reform by raising the cult of the sun disk Aten above the traditional gods. In a sense, this challenged the entire established order of Egypt. Akhenaten moved the capital, transformed artistic style, altered ritual life, and tried to reshape the spiritual foundation of the kingdom. After his death, much of this experiment was rejected, and the reform proved temporary. Yet the episode reveals that Egypt was not a civilization of total stillness. It also experienced deep internal struggles and dramatic attempts at change. The name Tutankhamun is known even to people who know very little else about Egyptian history. He was not the greatest conqueror or the boldest reformer. Yet his tomb, found almost untouched, became a worldwide sensation. The golden mask of Tutankhamun became one of the most famous symbols of ancient Egypt. The treasures discovered in his burial astonished the world and opened a direct window into royal luxury, ritual, and the Egyptian vision of eternity. Ramesses II is another monumental name. He is often called Ramesses the Great, and with reason. He ruled for a long time, built on a massive scale, fought major wars, and filled Egypt with monuments and inscriptions. His image perfectly matched the Egyptian ideal of kingship: powerful, majestic, victorious, and almost superhuman. He is associated with the famous Battle of Kadesh and with the peace treaty that followed, one of the earliest known international treaties in history. Yet beyond kings and wars, it is important to remember that Egypt was also a world of ordinary people. Farmers raised grain, craftsmen produced tools, vessels, cloth, and jewelry. Builders erected houses and temples. Fishermen supplied food, and Women managed households, raised children, and took part in the economic life of the family. We often view Egypt through pyramids and pharaohs, but a civilization is not sustained by rulers alone. It rests on the labor of countless people whose names history did not preserve. Egyptian art deserves admiration in its own right. It followed strict conventions, yet it possessed a remarkable ability to express grandeur, order, and sacred meaning. Tomb paintings, temple reliefs, statues of gods and kings, jewelry, and painted coffins were not created merely to be beautiful. Art served memory, authority, religion, and magic. In Egypt, an image could carry almost as much power as a written word. The temples of Egypt were monumental centers of power. They were not only places of worship, they also functioned as economic, cultural, and political institutions. Priests held influence, temple complexes owned land, stored wealth, and carried out some of the most important rituals of the state. Among the most famous are Karnak and Luxor. Their columns, courtyards, obelisks, and carved reliefs still leave a profound impression. They seem built not for one person, but for an entire people and their gods. Special attention should also be given to the Book of the Dead, the modern name for a group of funerary texts meant to guide the deceased through the afterlife. These texts contained spells, invocations, advice, and sacred formulas. They reveal how complex and carefully developed the Egyptian understanding of death truly was. The world of the living and the world of the dead were not separated by an absolute wall. There was a connection between them, and that connection had to be maintained correctly. Over time, the power of Egypt began to weaken. The kingdom faced internal struggles and external threats. Neighboring powers grew stronger, trade routes shifted, dependence on mercenary forces increased, and conflict over power eroded the state from within. Egypt experienced periods of foreign rule, brief revivals, and renewed decline. Assyrians came, then Persians, and later Alexander the Great. The arrival of Alexander opened a new chapter. After his conquest, Egypt came under the rule of the Ptolemies. This was already a different Egypt, no longer the Egypt that built the pyramids, yet still rich, powerful, and deeply significant. The Hellenistic world brought new forms of language, culture, and politics. In Alexandria rose one of the greatest cities of the ancient world, famous for its library, scholars, and lighthouse. Egypt once again stood at the center of world history, though now in a different form. The last brilliant figure of ancient Egyptian history was Cleopatra. Her image long ago moved beyond dry chronology and became almost legendary. Intelligent, educated, politically skilled, and ambitious, she tried to preserve Egypt's independence in a world increasingly dominated by Rome. Her alliances with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, and her dramatic fate and death made her one of the most famous women in history. After Cleopatra's death, Egypt finally fell under Roman rule. With that, the history of an independent ancient Egyptian state came to an end. But did Egypt disappear? Not at all. Its influence outlived its political independence. Egypt gave the world an enormous legacy: architecture, religious imagery, artistic forms, ideas of kingship, scientific observation, administrative methods, and above all, a sense of eternity that few other civilizations ever achieved. Even after thousands of years, Egypt still calls to the imagination. Archaeologists continue to uncover new tombs. Researchers still debate the purpose of ancient structures. Travelers from around the world come to stand before the pyramids. Writers and filmmakers return again and again to the image of pharaohs, curses, treasures, and sands hiding secrets. There is something unusual in this. Egypt is not merely studied, it is listened to as if across time. Perhaps that is what makes it truly great. Not only its age, not only its stone, not only its gold, but the feeling it leaves behind. The feeling that on the banks of the Nile, human beings once truly tried to defeat time. They carved their names into stone, lifted temples toward the sky, hid treasures deep in tombs, preserved bodies for eternity, and believed that the order of the world could be sustained through ritual, knowledge, and power. Egypt is the story of humanity's desire to leave a mark that will not vanish. It is the story of a civilization that rose among deserts and gave the world symbols recognized everywhere. It is the story of pharaohs, gods, war, pyramids, mysteries, and the hope of eternal life. It began thousands of years ago, yet in a sense, it has never fully ended because every new look at Egypt reveals something more. Another riddle, another meaning, another breath of eternity. When the sun sets over the sands and the shadows of the pyramids grow long, it is easy to imagine that ancient Egypt never truly vanished. It simply became silent, and it waits for those who will once again try to understand its language, its symbols, and its immortal soul.